Sup guys, Russian Anon here to share some spooks. It's not paranormal, but still, I figured it's way scarier than some of the stuff I see here. I was 10 years old. It was my best friend's birthday party. Almost every kid in the neighborhood was here, with only my friend's mother to look after all of us. We went to a fast food joint which could be compared to a 5-star Michelin restaurant for young Russian kids like us. After that, we went to the park and pretty much had free rein to just go wherever we wanted. As we were playing with some rolling bugs in the bushes, we were approached by a hobo. Not naive, we already knew what it usually meant, so we were ready to bolt out of there if this guy would try to kidnap some of us or do something weird. He appeared to be sober and generally a nice guy, claiming to us that he used to be a biology teacher. Nothing special about his physical appearance, just your average middle-aged ragged guy dressed in some gray tatty clothes and a black beanie hat. His face was pretty forgettable too. I'm pretty sure there was nothing scary or disturbing about it. He just stood next to us and told us about some stunning facts about the insects, never overstepping our boundaries. Once my friend's mom appeared to check on us, he simply walked away without looking back. We were a little bit weirded out, but, well, I guess it could have been worse, I thought. Our little army of kids went back to my friend's place to end the day with a piece of a delicious birthday cake. Soon enough, my dad picks me up and we start walking back home as the sun starts setting. We finally get to our block and enter the building. As I'm following him, he suddenly stops and I bump into his back. I look behind my father and see the same hobo from the park, to my great surprise. He just stood there, completely blocking the stairway, looking at us and giggling like some imbecile. Now, the situation would have been normally terrifying, but I wasn't really scared because my father was right there. My dad used to be a candidate for the Soviet Olympic boxing team back in his youth. He's a massive guy, 6'4" and over 250 pounds, and to add to that, he had quite the temper. It wasn't unusual for him to beat up random guys on the street for the most innocuous reasons, so I'm actually praying for the homeless guy to just leave without making a fuss. He asked him to leave our block, saying that homeless people are not tolerated inside the buildings. It was rude, but the hobo doesn't answer. He just kept giggling, then reached for his pocket and threw a handful of something at us. Hidden behind my father, I'm completely shielded from the projectiles and know that this poor idiot made a giant mistake. My dad, obviously enraged, ordered me to stay away, drags this man like a rag doll to the bottom of the stairway and just starts mauling him. And now I'm curious. I look at the projectiles that he threw in the ground, and just before picking one up, I stop myself. The little pebbles he threw appeared to be human teeth, still raw with some red tissue on them. I run to the ramp to peek at my father destroying this hobo, but I'm pretty impressed. The creep could actually defend himself. Compared to my Goliath of a father, he couldn't have been anything more than 5'5" and was skinny but surprisingly resilient. He kept giggling all along during this brutal beatdown, further enraging my father to go even harder. At one moment, he hit his head on the wall, emitting an insane, resonating thud, but still was giggling all along. Almost like an ultimate finishing move, my dad picked him up and threw him through the opening leading to the building's basement. My father was huffing and puffing, looking like he had exhausted all of his rage, which was a pretty rare sight. The man was still making some uncanny gurgling sounds, laying on his back. It was almost superhuman to take such a beating and still be conscious. My father went to the stairs after making me promise to not tell my mother, and we went back home acting as if though nothing had happened. The next morning, I woke up pretty early because I wanted to see if the guy was still there. I cautiously sneak out of the apartment and my feet bumped into a pile of teeth. I almost let out a scream, closed back the door, and run to my room to hide under my cover. For a few days, I'm haunted by the thought of the hobo ambushing me whenever I go outside the house, but thankfully, nothing like that happened. A couple of days later, I heard a woman screaming outside, and I went to the window to see what was happening and saw one of the neighbors living in the same block in total hysterics, crying and screaming. What happens next is just a compilation of rumors that I've overheard as the adults would never let us know stuff like that. A young couple, one of them including that screaming woman, living several floors down, came back home from their vacation to find their daughter dismembered and partly cooked in their own kitchen, and a grandmother, who was left to look after the girl, completely missing. I guess I was lucky to get picked up that day, and I'm glad I never saw him around the neighborhood since then. I'm still scared when I remember his inhuman resilience against my father. This story reports back to 2004, which puts me at 19 years old at the time. I was a pretty avid player of HOBO Hotel, and after getting noticed by some of the devs, I was promoted to community moderator. It was hyped up as a daunting task, but I have a lot of free reins to keep playing as I like, so I could still chat with users like a regular player. I met this slightly younger girl called Julia. She was 18 years old, on the newly opened Dutch version of HOBO, where I was supervising the launch. My job consisted of preventing the English users from making too much chaos in the new Dutch servers and banning the bad apples, which wasn't too demanding of a task, I thought. As we chatted up, she seemed nice and we had no problem connecting, even though she had pretty bad English. She requested that I talk with her more often so she could pick up the language. I decided to add her over on the UK version of HOBO, which is where I'm based, and we get talking pretty regularly and become quite good friends. I had a hunch that she was getting increasingly infatuated with me, but I let it slide under the radar because I'm quite used to these kind of personalities. Now fast forward to 2006, which puts me at 21. I become friends with a guy she knows called Adam, who, as soon as her name is mentioned, warns me that she's completely insane and that I'm an idiot for trusting her. One phrase I remember clearly was, "Just wait until she shows up on your doorstep, dude." I scoffed and answered something dismissive like, "Yeah, right, like that's gonna happen." One day, Julia stops coming on MSN and eventually drops off HOBO for a week. Radio silence until one day, out of nowhere, I get a phone call. A woman's voice with a heavy Dutch accent told me in broken English, Yes, I'm here to see you." The caller hangs up and leaves the line dead. At this point, I'm going into full denial mode. It must be a prank call. I was wrong, again. Later that day, I hear a knock on my door, and wouldn't you know it was Julia. Just as I opened the door, she threw herself over my doorstep and force-hugged me. I didn't know how to react to this because I didn't give her my address, and at this point, I'm terrified. What in God's name is happening right now? And against my better judgment, I awkwardly invited her in regardless, and I started to ask her what she's doing there and how she found me. I tried my best to keep my composure, but I'm visibly shaking at this point. Unbothered, she just smiles at me and explains, she got my address from a leak that happened on the customer support line 5 months prior, in which my address, work email, phone number, and full name were included with about 50 to 70 other people who worked for Salaki HOBO. She finishes her explanation with an eerie, "And now I'm here to be with you forever and ever. I get a ferry here to be with you." I didn't know how mentally stable this chick was, and obviously I didn't want to get my face peeled off. I also couldn't help but notice some self-harm scars, which made me pity her, so being the nice guy I am, I decided to just spend the day with her. I spent a full day with her glued on me. She seemed completely oblivious to my anxiety and kept acting like nothing is wrong, clinging on to me and calling me her boyfriend. When night came, I just pretended to be sleeping and she came nuzzling up to me. After the most surreal day ever, she thanks me and just goes home. I never hear from her, and I don't even see her online. About 3 months later, I learned from our mutual friend that she ended up in the loony bin. Apparently, the girl was extremely delusional, hearing voices and seeing things. The trigger for her transfer to the facility was her stabbing someone after he didn't play along with her boyfriend roleplay. I'm sweating bullets thinking of what could have happened, and needless to say, now I become terrified every time someone knocks on my door. I ended up having to move houses, and I still occasionally have nightmares over it. I was with my friends and we decided to go on a camping trip out in Carson National Forest in New Mexico. This is a spot that a lot of people recommended to us, and we just had cleared some days off, so what better way to spend it than with the boys? We drove to the place, got out of the truck, and set up camp in the clearing. We started off an amazing day, drinking, hiking, and goofing around together. As the sun started setting down, we went back to our camp and decided it was time to chill around a campfire. We cracked open a few more beers, started passing a blunt around, and munched on the snacks that we had brought with us. As the place was getting darker, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. At first, I thought that maybe the weed was getting to my head, but after telling my friends, they all seemed to agree that something just felt off. We started drunkenly shifting around the camp, scanning for any sort of wild beast. I started to smell something kind of disgusting, a sort of sweaty body odor, but couldn't pinpoint it to one of us. After a few minutes of this little paranoia session, clearing out most of the area around us, we'd look at each other and just laughed it off. Yeah, I think we're a little bit too high. We crawled back to our respective tents, and after jokingly taunting and cursing our imaginary stalker, we fell asleep. As I woke up in the morning, I get woken up by my buddy shaking my tent, and I use my feet to open the zipper, and he gets his head inside and tells me, "Yo, all our stuff is gone." Still groggy, I stumble out of the tent. It seems everything had been cleared out. The packs, the food, even some of the roaches on the floor disappeared. I reached into my pocket and feel sudden relief that my keys and phone are still with me. Thankfully, it seems that most of the stolen goods were either just food or hiking gear. After waking up the others and revealing to them the situation, our little detective crew notices some faint tracks leading to the tree line. We start following them while cursing the thieves, but most of all ourselves for leaving the bags outside. After a few meters, we see the track ending in front of a boulder. We check around the boulder to see if the tracks continued leading to somewhere, but to our disappointment, nothing. One of my friends stepped on the rock. Well, I guess they just jumped on the boulder and took off into the sky? After this failed attempt at breaking the tense mood, he hopped back on the ground and we all heard a clear, unnatural thud. We all bundle around the area and kick off the dirt and leaves, and we can see it clear as day. It's some kind of rusty wooden trap door on the ground, around 3 by 2 feet. After looking at each other, we lift it open and are met with a pitch-black tunnel seemingly staring back at us. As we dumbfoundedly stared at the darkness, the familiar sweaty body odor stench started wafting out of it. One of my friends closed the hatch, rolled the boulder on it, and we went to pack up whatever was still there and left with impressive efficiency. One important detail to keep in mind was that the spot was nowhere near the Mexican border, and even then it was way too narrow for any normal-sized human moving around it. I still have no idea how long the tunnel ran, but it couldn't have been easy to dig. It must have required a lot of manpower and a lot of time. The darknet is not really what it's hyped up to be. Tor and protocols like it are just there to give a semblance of anonymity and plausible deniability if you ever get caught. Actual darknets are kept well and truly hidden, and cannot be found by any means available to the average user of 4chan. You can trust me on that. A friend of mine works at a small car insurance broker's office and asked me to fix a problem with his computer not recognizing the office scanner on the network. It was nothing out of the ordinary for me. I brought my laptop, and as I start searching for a signal, I notice a random Wi-Fi with high signal strength. Now, out of curiosity, I turn on one of my programs to get in and pick out the password while I'm working on the scanner. This wasn't very moral, but I always like the rush of breaking a password. A few hours later, after the work with the scanner was done, I checked to see if the password had been cracked. Of course, it was, and I connected to the network and started poking around. From what I can tell, it's a basic home network, one system online with internet access. No firewall, Apparently no antivirus, nothing out of the ordinary. And just for the hell of it, before leaving, I drop in a back door for good measure. Again, not very moral, I must admit, but you never know what goodies you can run across, and for some reason, I was in the mood for some digging around. After getting home to my main computer, I get myself comfortable with some hot chocolate, crack my knuckles, and really start scanning around this new network. So far, it looks like your average home computer. I'd say the most interesting stuff was just some tax returns. There are a couple of text files that have what appear to be passwords, random characters, and a couple of names. Nothing really piqued my interest, and I decided to leave a worm in it nonetheless. This malware would replicate itself in any network coming in contact, and maybe this time I could be able to catch something juicy and profitable. Weeks later, while I'm arranging my programs, I realized that there are 4 new ones that I hadn't set up myself. What I figured later is that the owner of that mysterious computer, my friend's boss, had taken a file from it on a floppy, which my worm happily infected, which then spread to a few more machines. And this is where the interesting stuff begins. 2 of those machines had internet access, of course, but they had apparently never been used to actually access the internet. They both ran Windows 98, completely unpatched. The only reason they had internet access was only because they were physically networked with other machines that were used for internet access. Each of these machines had about 3 terabytes of storage, but mostly appeared empty since everything in it was fully encrypted. Some of the easily viewable stuff included huge amounts of personal information, including social security numbers and tax IDs. There were names, addresses, lists of families and friends, sometimes pets, and sometimes an impressive amount of details such as vehicle, clothing, height, weight, and recent medical issues. Huge amounts of information. Not every listing had all of it, and some were just a name, but everything had a date and time with it. Couldn't make much sense of that. What I could make sense of were the bank accounts. Thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of account numbers, institutions, and safety deposit boxes from all over the world. South Africa, Russia, Brazil, everywhere. Nothing but the basic identifying information and another date. No note of what they might be. My eyes start shining as I'm thinking that I'd hit a huge jackpot. And as I'm picking through one of these 2 machines, I notice a file being written in real time. I figured someone was using the computer at that moment, but having full access to the command events, I could tell that nobody was using a mouse or keyboard. I figured it was an automated system, and I watched the process for about a minute. Then I realized the computer was communicating on another network that I didn't have access to. The file was encrypted, and after a few attempts, I finally cracked it open. It was a movie, MPEG format. The title was just a random string. I laid back on my chair, proud of my catch, and I launched the video. On the screen was an overhead view of 3 men sitting at a table, almost like an interrogation room footage. In the entire 15 minutes of the video, only one of them spoke. Sounded like gibberish, and I figured it was code, or maybe he was just a psychiatric patient rambling. He said things like, "broken banana stung red boot," and would pause for a moment, and then start saying another strange sentence. This strange scene kept going on for about 10 minutes. The other 2 just watched him. One was drinking what I assumed was coffee. Finally, he leaned back and asked if they could leave his daughter alone. The guy drinking the coffee just shook his head quickly and made a motion with his hand telling him to continue. The man talking for a moment leaned forward and started saying those nonsense sentences while sobbing. After the first video ended, I see that a new file just finished uploading to the server. I had a really weird feeling about it, but I decided to check it anyway, and to my shock, the man that had spoken in the first one was now on the table, naked, crying like a baby on top of what appeared to be the corpse of a young girl, with blood all over the table. The other 2 men were still in the room, standing on both sides, watching, smoking cigarettes. I didn't finish watching, only got about a few seconds or so in before it sank in what I was seeing. I've seen a lot of weird footage on the internet, and I can tell when something is a movie or not. Still in shock, I cleaned my traces from those systems and haven't looked back since. What I'm still finding hard to believe is that from the computer I originally hacked, these other systems got infected by a floppy disk, meaning that someone had to physically move to the location. As far as I could tell, the two storage computers were on opposite sides of the globe, one in LA and one in Beijing. And as far as I know, my friend's boss had not left the country. His brother-in-law had been visiting at the time, though. I truly have no idea what was going on. I never told the story to anyone, and frankly, I needed to get it off my chest. I worked construction when I was younger. I wouldn't say I loved the job, but it paid well, and I was left alone listening to music most of the time. This time, I was sent out to repave a residential road in a quiet, rural area. It was early in the morning. I must have been the first to arrive, as there was not a soul in sight. I prepare myself, put my headphones on, and hop on the roller and start flattening the road. I'm going at a slow, steady pace as usual, though I must admit that I was still a little bit drowsy, not really paying attention to my surroundings. Suddenly, this little kid who looked around 3 years old bolts out from the tree line in front of the roller. I didn't even have time to react to it, and all I felt was this little unnatural bump shaking my seat. I went into shock for half a second, turned off the rig, and started looking around. As I inspected the road behind the roller, you could clearly see a shape. I think the poor soul was so small that I squashed him and sank him right into the thick tar. It was still dark, and frankly, I didn't have the guts to shine a light on it. As I came to my senses, I started looking around nervously, expecting one of my coworkers to stare back at me in shock. But nothing. Only an oppressive silence, and it seems nobody saw the incident. Now that the shock wore down, I became possessed by some kind of self-preservation demon. I climbed back in my machine and made what I can only describe as the most cold-hearted decision of my entire life. I started the engine and went back up and over until the road felt completely flat. I kept passing over the spot until the only thing left was my memory of the vague shape sunken into the tar. About half an hour later, as the workers kept coming in, a woman came running by, hysterically asking everyone if we'd seen her son. As the others were trying to calm her and looking around for the kid, I kept using my roller. I remember feeling completely numb, even as my seniors passed by and asking me if I'd seen him, and I just shook my head and continued smoothing the asphalt, going at a slow, steady pace, blankly staring in front of me. To this day, that poor woman must have no idea what happened to her son, searching desperately when he's literally right under them. I feel immense guilt, and I often want to apologize, but it's too late for it now. I guess the next best thing is sharing it with anonymous strangers. This happened during grad school. We had a program where we could get 2 classes worth of credit for simply doing a 2-week volunteer service mission in Costa Rica. Easy credits and a free trip? That's an easy decision for me. Now, as June came, I flew to the location and I could immediately feel the temperature change. Not only was it pretty hot, but the humidity levels were extreme as well. The first order of business was helping this poor village, so I took the bus and finally get to where my other classmates were staying. As I arrived at the location, I'm greeted by one of my senior classmates who shows me around and introduces me to the others. After this little visit, he guides me to a big brick hut. This place is a temporary dorm room. He shows me my bed and follows me to it. The dude was pretty laid back, but for some reason, he got way more serious when explaining to me how to set up the mosquito net. He showed me how the net went under the mattress and hooked up above the bed, making it look like a great teardrop. He removes it and asks me to do it again. I oblige, and he cheerfully says, Yes, you got it." After a long and sweaty day of work, I go back to the dorm room. I can feel and see a similar amount of mosquitoes buzzing around, and I understand why my senior was so insistent on the proper setting of the net. I crawl into my bed, close the net, and let out a long sigh. It's pretty hard to sleep with the humidity and heat, and I'm rolling around, turning on my pillow every minute, trying to get more comfortable. At some point, The exhaustion makes me forget the steamy heat, and I just roll on my back and stare at the ceiling. Strangely, it seemed as if though the wall was moving, or pulsating almost. Was I hallucinating from the fatigue, or was it an optical illusion from the heat creating some wavy mirage pattern? Since everyone else was sleeping, I decided I'd take my phone out and quickly shone it on the wall. My brain started registering one thing: legs. Legs in every nook and cranny of the wall. Small legs, long legs, hairy legs, and we're completely surrounded by spiders. I tried my best to stay composed. I didn't want to be the rookie freaking out on his first night there. I'm wondering how they can sleep knowing what's around them. Mosquitoes I can live with, sure, even spiders, but this amount and this size. As my eyes start adjusting, I see something right next to me. I don't even need the light to realize it's a dinner plate-sized spider crawling on the other side of the mosquito net, only 2 inches away from my face. Panicking, I hit the net so it gets knocked off. Not daring to use the flashlight anymore, I try my best to ignore it and spend the night absolutely terrified. I didn't dare ask anyone about it since, well, I didn't want to look like a cowardly rookie, and I guess the work kept my mind busy. As the week went by, it didn't get any better, though I realized the spiders left you alone and the nets did their job pretty well. The only time I saw anybody acknowledge it was when I was coming back to the camp. One of my heavier classmates came running by faster than an Olympic sprinter and puffs out a quick, "Spider behind!" I'm confused, and as I turn my head, I notice the leaves rustling in a straight line towards us. As I start running, I can finally see the shape of the most humongous spider I'd ever seen yet. We close the dorm room and hide in the nets. As I stared at the ceiling, I thought to myself, no wonder they gave us so many credits for just 2 weeks. I live in Northern Virginia, a town around an hour outside of DC, and because of Corona and quarantine, I've been at home with my parents delivering pizza for a job. So far, it's been pretty lucrative, at least $50 in tips every night. My store is a local one, which makes operations a lot less mechanical and a bit more organic, which serves as both a vice and a virtue. It had been around 3 weeks since I got hired, and I was enjoying my life as the new delivery guy. I love the job. It's one of the best I'd ever had. At the end of the night, perhaps 10 or so minutes before closing, we get an order, of course for a single pizza on the edge of the delivery border. The location looks like an apartment complex way off the main road, and my manager asked me, "Hey, all the drivers are closing. You take that order and just head home, alright?" The order is really simple, just an extra large pizza with 3 extra cheese options. I put the pizza in the sleeve, hop in my car, and begin playing Underworld on the speaker, in the mood to drive fast and kick some butt. Now, when most apartment complexes are lit up with street lamps or other ambient light, this one had no functioning light sources, and the roads leading up to it were very serpentine and steep. After navigating the crooked roads, I finally arrive at the apartment complex. The room's on the 3rd floor, and since the elevator isn't turning on, I have to heave myself up these stairs. I get to the door, and a little porch light is switched on, conveniently lighting up the room number. I can distinguish the sound of 2 or 3 children playing around inside. As soon as I knock, the door opens almost instantly. Taken aback, I see a small kid standing in the doorway, probably one of the little dudes playing earlier. I ask him, "Hey, little man, are Mom and Dad home?" He answers, "No, but Big Sister is." This kind of put me on edge, as I'm not comfortable having to deal with some little kid and money, but then my attention goes to the kid's clothes. He's wearing pajamas with pingus all over them, and while they weren't super tattered or worn out, you could see a streak of this sort of brownish stuff that I took to be chocolate or something. The kid keeps staring at me while I'm getting gradually more uncomfortable, and I ask him, "Well, can you go grab Big Sis for me?" He looks at me confused and explains, "No, she's playing hide and seek. I can't find her. Do you want to come inside and help me find her?" At this moment, I get an actual look at the interior, and I'm just stunned. The room is unbelievably dark, with the walls painted either a dark gray or black, absorbing what little light is produced by this very old block-style TV. You can feel how very cramped this room is, even from outside, and you can smell the awful cigarettes and day-old fish odor wafting out of it. I'm definitely not going inside, so I tell him, sorry, little buddy, I can't come inside. It'd be rude, and my bosses say I can't." The kid looks back into the apartment and yells to his sister,
"Sis, he won't come inside."
I notice that he's got a very concerned look on his face, as if though he just got caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Suddenly his face shifts to one of deep intent, almost like he got turned into a trance somehow, and he tells me calmly, "She says it's okay, and that she has your money inside." No, I didn't hear anybody here, and it was getting a little bit too disturbing, so I decided it was time to just get away. I nervously say to him, "Listen, I'm just gonna go ahead and leave this here, okay? I gotta head back to work soon, so yeah, have a good night, kid." He loudly retorts, "No, you can't go yet. Sister hasn't given you the monies." I can tell that he was visibly upset as he runs through the foyer into the living room, almost disappearing into the darkness. The rancid, fishy cigarette smell from earlier is getting even more intense, and along with a pressure unlike I've ever felt before. I'm getting extremely uncomfortable at this point, and I start kneeling to complete the contactless delivery procedure. As I take the pizza out of the sleeve and begin setting it on the ground, I notice a single cockroach emerging from the door. I get up to stomp on it, as I don't want it getting in the pizza box. As I raise my foot, it ceases moving, like it had accepted its fate somehow. As my soul comes in contact with the insect, an ear-splitting, inhuman wail reverberates off the walls of the interior, piercing my eardrums. I remember being overwhelmed by a primal fear and hearing the little kid inside saying something like, "Sissy, no, he didn't mean it." I start hearing scuttling from down the hall, and I decided to evacuate. I was kind of surprised at my corporate senses being active still, as I still took a second to put the pizza on the doorstep before bailing out. As I'm bolting down the stairs, I guess I must have stepped on another cockroach, because another shriek chased me down the stairs. I faintly hear the kid's voice giggling, "Come back, mister. I have your monies right here." I enter my car, and I almost stain my seat right there. I'm sweating so badly and shaking more than Michael J. Fox. After a few attempts, I successfully start the car and bolt out of that cursed complex. While driving, I feel nauseous, and I arrive at a 7-Eleven parking lot and hurl outside the window. After simmering down, I drive back home and take a long shower. And that's my only real encounter with the paranormal, I guess, if that really what it was. I can honestly say I never saw anything or had anything touch me, and maybe it was just some kind of elaborate prank from the kids, but I can promise you I will never be delivering within 5 miles of that apartment. And frankly, I might even quit my job. I never want to risk getting sent near there again. Click the join button to become a member today for exclusive content. I was around 9 years old. My parents divorced when I was young, so I was staying with my dad for the weekend. This house was a little bit outside of town and a nice change from the cramped apartment I lived in with my mom. Not only the house was big, but there was also a large plot of land around it, and though my father didn't own it, I played on it nevertheless. One of my favorite parts was my bedroom with a direct view of the large forestry area behind the house. I could see all kinds of wild animals in the big window right after waking up, ranging from little rabbits to even majestic elks. One day, as the weather didn't allow me to play outside, I decided to forage around the house in hopes of finding anything that would entertain me. I entered the large library my father owned, and one book caught my attention. The cover was made of leather, and it had a pretty fancy look to it. I opened it, and it seems to be a photo album. Mostly family photos, old pictures of my dad with mom, and they looked really happy and in love. As I flip through the pages, I start seeing photos of myself. Birthdays, Christmas celebrations, every event chronologically documented in there. Towards the end of the book, I'm starting to see pictures of my dad's house, just pictures taken from the back of the house, really nothing more to it. Every picture looked very similar. Flipping more, I see pictures of me playing around the forest. I giggle as I realize that my dad was probably taking those pictures, documenting me like I was some little wild beast. I ran to his workstation with the book in hand and asked him, "Dad, why do you have so many pictures of me?" He held me up and sat me on his knees. "I keep so many photos because I miss you so much when you're not there." We started to go through the pictures, with him explaining to me every event going on. He seemed a little nostalgic, but kept everything light, cracking his usual dad jokes and commentaries. When we got to the pics of the house, he started becoming silent. And dropping me back on the floor, he turned the book in a way that wasn't allowing me to see and started flicking through the pages. He looked bewildered, and I noticed the color draining from his face until he stopped at what looked to be the final page. He closed the book loudly and got his composure back. "All right, we're going to go to the mail, and then we're going to go back to Mom, all right? How's that sound?" I wanted to protest and ask what was in the book, but even my young self could feel the mood, and we both packed our bags and left the house. As he dropped me off at my mom's, I could see them arguing. After this event, I wasn't allowed to sleep at his house again, and I noticed that he was particularly intent on following me everywhere when I came to visit. I never mentioned the book again until years later. After asking him about it, I noticed my dad's cheery persona drop again, and he sat me down and let out a deep sigh. Apparently, the last pictures were of me asleep, taken directly by my bedside. The last picture was taken from the inside of my room, directly pointing toward the window. Several people with animal masks were standing outside looking directly at the camera. He told me he reported it to the police, but there was little they could do, so he ended up selling the house. In a way, I'm glad he kept it from me for so long, because I wasn't able to sleep well for the next few months without making sure the window was locked and the curtains were drawn. I'm convinced that I found a fake town last year, something straight out of the Truman Show. This was during the last summer. I was doing a cross-country road trip, hitting up some national parks and taking pictures to post to the outboards. I was driving around central southern Utah and was starting to feel tired since I had been on the road since about 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. It was completely dark, with no moonlight, and I can only see what was lit up by my headlights. As I'm heading for an exit and a place to rest, I see a town off in the distance. I nearly missed the pull-off as it was unmarked and unlit, and I notice it's not even showing up on my GPS. As I glance at my phone, I see that there's no cell service too. Now the town is directly ahead though, so I keep going straight, and after a bit I notice that the road turns to dirt for about 5 miles, and just as I start wondering if I'd strayed off, the road feels like it turned to pavement again. I start seeing houses and shops, but almost immediately the town strikes me as kind of uncanny. Nobody is on the streets, and no cars on the streets or in the parking lots. Everything is really clean, and I am able to hear some old school jazz music through the streets for some reason, though I can't really pinpoint the source of the speakers. This town looked to be about 7 blocks wide and pretty modern. Out there was every major fast food chain I've heard of and multiple hotels on the main street, but still, nothing showing up on the GPS. As my stomach starts growling, I decide I'll go get food before anything else. I decide I'm in the mood for chicken, so I go in the direction of the familiar-looking KFC first. Looking through the window, I can see that the inside was fully illuminated, and though the door was unlocked, nobody was there. I turn the corner and try my luck at Jack in the Box, but same thing there. I start wondering if there's some kind of emergency drill that I missed. I'm starting to get anxious, but those thoughts evaporate as I see movement in the McDonald's. I push the door open and see a cashier and a cook in the back. When I get to the counter, he greets me coldly, looking pretty annoyed for some reason. I order my usual nuggets and fries meal, and as I'm eating, I notice that the nuggets and fries taste nothing like classic McDonald's ones. Not bad, but nothing like the typical combo I ate many times before. At this point, I'm not in a confrontational mood and can feel the cashier glaring at me, so I finish my meal and leave without saying a word. Now reassured that I didn't stumble into a complete ghost town, it's time to find a bed for the night. I drive up to the Hampton Inn to, again, a completely empty parking lot. I get to the reception and I'm greeted by another annoyed-looking woman who, after going on her computer, informs me that they're all booked up. I take my chance at La Quinta, and this time a familiar-looking person is behind the counter. I'm not certain of it, but I think it was the cook at the McDonald's, and he apologizes as I'm approaching. Of course, the hotel is also fully booked. It's getting pretty late, and this time I'm ready to throw a tantrum and even sleep in the lobby if I get rejected. I push open the door of the Holiday Inn Express, and I'm shocked as the person behind the check-in counter is clearly the mean-looking cashier who served me at McDonald's again. After looking at him puzzled, he just looks back at me and asks me, "One room for tonight?" I nod, and after booking me and handing me the key, I shyly asked him, Are you the guy from McDonald's?" He cut eye contact for a second and answered, "No, that's my brother, yeah. We get that often." Good enough for me, I guess. At this point, I just want to roll with it and get to my room. I finally lay on my bed and I check my phone and still no signal. I take a quick shower and I just crash. I go out of my room the next day and I expect to see the lobby alive and full of people, but again, nobody except the brother of the McDonald's cashier was looking at me. As I'm checking out, I ask him how to get out of town. "Same road you came in, buddy." I leave the empty parking lot, and out of curiosity, I decided to go check the McDonald's to see this so-called twin brother, but it looked to be empty. The drive-thru was open, and I decided to order a griddle and coffee to start up the day. To my shock, the lady in the drive-thru looked a lot like the first hotel attendant from the Hampton Inn. She hands me what looks like a microwaved English muffin and some kind of instant coffee. I decide the place is just too weird to stay and argue, and I head back to the only road out of town. Maybe 3 miles onto the dirt road, I notice a big metal wire fence on both sides of the road in the desert. I'm met with a big motorized gate that starts closing as soon as I pass through. I get back onto the road and to my shock, get onto 62 when I could have sworn that I was on 89 when I decided to pull off. My phone starts buzzing, finally getting cell service. Later, when filling up gas, I search on my phone and nothing matched the description of the town. And even weirder, none of the charges for the hotel or food showed up on my card. I've told some people and somebody suggested it was Richfield, but I know that I was south of there and, they would have actually charged me for my spending. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. EST, and there are some super fun live streams that you should join on Sundays, Tuesdays, and Thursday nights. And if you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let'sReadOfficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations and save huge on data. Located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, don't waste eggs underwater.